Part 1. Reality According to Don Juan. Chapter 1. The Eagle's Emanations, a Universe of Energy Fields. Preliminaries. Although this book aspires to be of eminently practical nature, in this part I want to broadly outline the vision of reality that forms the basis of the complex system of knowledge and action of the warriors and seers of the Nawal's party. Keep in mind that it represents only what we as external observers might call the basic theories of the doings of the sorcerer. For Don Juan and his warriors, none of this is theory, because they see and live the world in this way. While for an external observer, such a world can only be imagined. This is important because the practice of the exercises and techniques described herein constitutes, in my own experience, a doorway into the living experience of this separate reality. Precisely from the moment we become witnesses and participants in the experience of this otherness, relative to the separate reality of the self or the world, we penetrate into the alternate possibilities of our own perception and awareness. At that time, the explanations of Don Juan take on their true meaning, becoming useful tools for the understanding of realities that otherwise would submerge us in confusion. The description of the world according to the tradition of Don Juan furnishes us with a roadmap that allows us to understand and interact functionally with the reality lying beyond ordinary perception. In the same way, our ordinary description of reality, learned since infancy, aids us in understanding our experiences and interactions in the everyday world. From this, we can surmise that to function soberly and efficiently, whoever penetrates into a new world requires a view of that world distinct from the ordinary and congruent with its new living possibilities. This is precisely why, at the same time that he involves his apprentice in the execution of various pragmatic exercises, Don Juan also provides him with numerous explanations of how the warriors of his party understand reality. And this is necessary for anyone who becomes involved in the way of the warrior by putting into practice the possibilities, both implicit and explicit, of the work of Castaneda. I refer to those who are seriously interested in experiencing the magic beyond the pages of a book, within the realm of their own lives. It should be mentioned that the ideas that follow do not in any way constitute a total panorama of Don Juanist thinking. They do emphasize those parts that directly relate to the areas where our work groups have made inroads, and it is precisely those to which I refer throughout this book. I will not dwell upon them at any great length, as it would require another work dedicated to this one objective alone to approach them in any great detail. Nevertheless, many of the themes I touch upon here will be developed in later chapters, together with their forms of concrete application. The origin. The origin of the vision of the world of Don Juan Matus is rooted in the mysterious, although it is evident that it contains a multi-ethnic substratum and shares many of its significant elements with the indigenous world of Mesoamerica, particularly the Toltec universe. Such correlation can be found readily in the ethno-historical information of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, as well as through direct contact with the descendants of the Toltec culture currently alive. For example, the Nahuas, the Huicholes, and Maya. Concepts such as tonal and nawal, the other self, the dreamed, the earth as a conscious being, are still used and practiced by the indigenous peoples of our time, almost at the dawn of the year 2000, as I have personally witnessed through my contacts with Indians of Toltec descent. As for ourselves, the idea of a reality made up of fields of energy, which are not complete as we ordinarily perceive them, has been intuited continually down through the ages by the rest of humanity via such phenomena as religious visions, Oriental philosophies of yoga and Hinduism, modern theories of physics, and currents of modern thought such as phenomenology. In any case, it seems that no one has expressed a similar vision of reality with as much clarity and pragmatism as Carlos Castaneda does throughout his works. He emphasizes that the relativity of perception and the consequent existence of alternate realities are not mere philosophical speculation or an idle intellectual exercise. There are, in fact, genuine concrete applications on the level of perception and living experience of the individual, as we can readily observe in the extraordinary events that take place between the warriors of the Nawal's party throughout the 8 books mentioned. The eagle's emanations. For Don Juan Matus, the existing world is not composed of objects as we see them, but is made up of fields of energy that he terms the eagle's emanations. These fields compose, in fact, the only transcendental reality. These emanations are grouped into great clusters or bands, each making up an independent world. Don Juan speaks of the existence of 48 great bands of emanation, 2 of which are accessible to humans through our ordinary perception. One of these is the band of organic life. The second is a band that includes structures without consciousness, presumably minerals, gases, liquids, and so forth. Inside the band of emanations of organic beings exists a strip relating in particular to the band of humanity, which determines the narrow limits of the perception of the known. As each person does not align all the emanations in this band, there exist small variations in the possibilities of perception from person to person. These would include such cases as special sensitivity, extrasensory perception, psychic phenomena, or genius, or conversely, mental retardation, stupidity, or insensitivity. The emanations normally aligned are known as normal awareness, the tonal, the right side. Inside the band of humanity are a large number of unused but accessible emanations that remain latent, though generally ignored, possibilities throughout a person's life. These constitute the anteroom of the unknown. The emanations lying beyond the band of humanity constitute the unknown proper, and as such are never aligned in the context of ordinary life. They are known as the Nawal, a separate reality, the left side. Part of the work of Don Juan and his group of warriors was devoted to developing the ability to align and perceive these emanations. The assemblage point. The factor that determines which emanations will be selected or aligned in a given moment of perception is called the assemblage point. It can be regarded as the property of awareness that selects the appropriate emanations to produce the simultaneous perception of all the elements that constitute the particular world being perceived. The alignment of the assemblage point with certain bands or emanations in particular, and specific emanations inside the aligned band, is known as the position of the assemblage point. What this means for the average person is that his or her assemblage point produces a singular alignment, which is perceived as the everyday world. A small movement in the position of the assemblage point will produce an alignment of emanations normally disregarded within the band of humanity. A large change will align the assemblage point with the other great bands of emanations. The ultimate goal of this system of knowledge, as set forth by Castaneda, is to achieve the deliberate movement of the assemblage point, to free the self from the confines of ordinary perception. Although moving the assemblage point is not an easy task, in reality, even small movements are enough to produce enormous changes in any life, in the form of being as well as in behavior and perception of the world. The entire system of Don Juan's teachings is geared toward this goal. It is divided into two areas: the teachings for the right side and the teachings for the left side. Each signifies in its own way the forms of not doing that enable the assemblage point to move, which are known as stalking and dreaming, respectively. The ability to perceive emanations is a faculty of living beings that they continue to cultivate during their lives, causing perception to take place in specific ways. To cultivate perception, each human is compelled, beginning at birth, to develop the capacity to select only a portion of the total emanations accessible to humans, and to perceive them so that they function for that individual. If this were not done, the emanations would be perceived as incommensurable chaos. The forms of attention. As has been mentioned, the factor of awareness determining the totality of the emanations perceived is called the assemblage point. The process of skimming the aligned emanations, grouping the appropriate ones while disregarding those deemed unnecessary, thus instilling order and meaning to the perception of objects, is called attention. This is in the Spanish language editions of the Castaneda books only, and is obtained from raw awareness by means of cultivating perception. In agreement with the field in which it operates, attention is classified into three types, which are realized on three distinct levels. The first attention is the ordering of the perception in the world of the known. The second attention operates and puts order in the sphere of the unknown. And the third integrates the first two, allowing access to the unknowable. As regards the third attention, I present it here the way Castaneda does in his work, although I hasten to point out that my experience and practice to date remained restricted to the realm of the first and second attention. Therefore, I can only consider it a tale of power. For ordinary people and for warriors in the initial phase of their apprenticeship, the first attention is the more important because it is the field of operation in which their lives take place. In fact, it is the specialized and strategic handling of his or her actions in the first attention that allows the warrior eventual access to the second. The precise way in which the first attention selects and organizes the perceived emanations does not happen by chance. Rather, it responds to a specific training that is cultivated throughout our lives and whose fundamental features were rooted during the first years of our existence. The unknown and the unknowable. Not all the emanations of the eagle are accessible to us. The vast majority of them occur in the realm of the unknowable. In The Fire from Within, Don Juan affirms that the sphere of what can be known is made up of 7 great bands of emanation that can ultimately become accessible to perception and that are divided into the known and the unknown. The confines of the known are in reality a minuscule part of the total emanations available to us. Nevertheless, they are the confines in which we, as ordinary people, remain for our entire lives, and they contain all the elements we perceive as reality in the everyday world. Everything that each person is and does lies within this part. The unknown is a practically infinite part that for ordinary humans remains unexplored during the whole of life, although they have the possibility to reconnect themselves and perceive any part of the eagle's emanations included in it. The description of the world. At the moment of birth, babies do not perceive the world in the same way as do adults. Their attention is not yet functioning as the first attention. Therefore, they do not share the same perceptual world of those around them. Although surrounded by the same emanations, they have not yet learned to select and organize them as would an adult. This they will have to achieve little by little as they grow and assimilate the description of the world provided by their elders. Anyone, especially an adult, who comes into contact with an infant, in effect, becomes a teacher, in most cases unconsciously, who incessantly describes the world to the child. Although children initially do not comprehend the description, eventually they will finally learn to perceive reality in terms of the description. It will be the description that determines the precise form in which their perception selects and organizes the fields of energy that surround them. It is valid to say that what we perceive daily is the same description flowing constantly from ourselves toward the outside world. The flow of the description is generally constant, sustaining our familiar perception of the world, moment by moment, day after day. If the flow is suspended, our perception of the world collapses, resulting in what is known in the writings of Castaneda as stopping the world. Seeing refers to the capacity to perceive the world as it appears once the flow of the description has been interrupted. During the initial phase of his apprenticeship with Don Juan, Carlos is taught the description of the world, according to sorcerers, as a means of interrupting the flow of his ordinary description. Later he learns that it too is but a description in which he could become trapped. Don Juan on more than one occasion declares that he is not a sorcerer, but rather a warrior and a seer. The internal dialogue. The internal dialogue is the mental conversation that we sustain constantly with ourselves and is the most immediate expression of reality assimilated by everyone. Its function is that of a guardian whose fundamental task is to protect said description, nourishing it with its own contents, thoughts, and generating the doings that reinforce it. This implies that because of the things we talk to ourselves about, we perceive the world and behave as we do, which in turn tends to confirm the content and description of the internal dialogue. This can come to such extremes that we accustom ourselves to substitute thoughts in place of reality. We look at the world, the things, the people, ourselves, at the same time thinking about what we see, and finish by taking our thoughts for the real thing. We tell ourselves the world is such and so, and leave convinced that it is indeed thus. Naturally, all of that which happens as a consequence of the internal dialogue ceases the moment we are able to stop said dialogue. This is why Don Juan speaks of stopping the internal dialogue as the key that opens the door between the worlds. The rings of power. The ability to skim certain aligned emanations to agree with the terms of the description shared by the rest of humanity is called the first ring of power, which we somehow attach to the elements of the world, projecting onto them our description of it. The result is our perception of the world such as we experience it. In addition, everyone's ring of power is attached to everyone else's. So the construction of reality in terms of the description is to a certain extent a collective task in which all those involved in a given specific situation participate. This makes the perception of each object more or less the same for everyone. And at the same time, there exists a second ring of power that allows perception to occur outside the ordinary description. This the sorcerer uses to construct other worlds. Although everyone has this second ring, it functions only when the first ring is shut down, a thing that rarely occurs in the life of ordinary people. Not doing. One way in which the first ring can be blocked is by performing actions foreign to our ordinary description of the world, what is known as not doing. The ordinary description of the world compels us to behave always according to the terms it indicates. Therefore, all actions emanate from said description and subsequently tend to revalidate it. These actions are what is known as doing. and in combination with the description that nourishes them, they make up a system that is virtually self-sustaining. Any action that is not congruent with the description of the world would constitute a form of not doing. Not doing interrupts the flow of the description, and this interruption, in turn, suspends the doing of the world of the known. Not doing is the medium that opens the way to the unknown side of reality and of oneself. In other words, it provides access to the Nawal, what is referred to in the case of the world as the separate reality, or in the case of an individual as the awareness of the other self. Since not doing practiced from right side awareness has the power to bring us to facets of left side awareness, its systematic practice creates points of contact between both sides. Little by little, this can bring us closer to the integration of both modes of awareness, resulting in what is known as the totality of oneself. The ego as part of the description. Another aspect to be considered is that all we refer to when we say I, the ego, is also an element of the description we assimilate. This is especially significant if we realize that this part of the description keeps us chained to a form of being and behavior that, while it may appear absolute and definitive, can be interrupted or suspended entirely, opening unlimited possibilities in what we can be or do. In that sense, the not doing that suspends the flow of the description represents an open door to freedom and change. When by means of the not doings of the personal self, we interrupt the flow of the description of our own person, we free ourselves from the enchantment of the ego, which wants us to believe that it represents the only reality. We can recognize then our true nature as fields of energy, free and fluid. Starting from that moment, we can take on the task of reinventing ourselves in an intentional and voluntary fashion, able to respond in novel ways to new situations that each moment provides for us. The tonal and the nawal. One of the more all-encompassing aspects of the Don Juanist vision is the dual conception of reality expressed by the terms tonal and nawal. Without a doubt, one of the many examples indicative of its pre-Columbian substratum, it is not difficult to establish the close relation between such concepts and the two facets of Ometioto, the principal maintainer of the world in the ancient Nahuatl tradition, whose highest expression was reached in the Toltec world. Castaneda makes his most detailed exposition of the tonal and the nawal in Tales of Power. There, he reveals to us the two aspects of the tonal as the space in which the average person exists during the duration of life, and as the organizer that gives meaning and significance to everything having to do with awareness. The tonal includes all that a human is, thinks, and does, all that we can think and talk about. Reason, thought, and the ordinary description of reality are the fortress of the tonal, the entire spectrum of the known. It is noteworthy that for an average person, there exists only the known, so that all conscious experience is restricted within the confines of the tonal, which begins at birth and ends in death. The nawal then would be all that remaining outside the tonal. It is that about which it is not possible to think. Castaneda presents the tonal as an island upon which is passed the whole of life. No one knows anything about what lies beyond the borders of the island. The nawal would be all that space of unfathomable mystery surrounding it. Although the nawal cannot be understood or verbalized, since understanding and words belong to the tonal, it nevertheless can be witnessed and experienced. That is one of the prime objectives of a sorcerer. It is not important to try to understand or rationalize the experience of the nawal. The sorcerer is interested only in the pragmatic possibilities it puts within his or her reach. Although ultimately everything occurs in the nawal, which is all-encompassing. The task of the tonal is to endow the reality of the nawal, the universe of the eagle's emanations, with order and meaning, which are not part of transcendental reality. The tonal and the nawal, aspects of the world, also have a corresponding expression in every human being, each of whom has a tonal side and a nawal side. In the work of Castaneda, they are also called awareness of the right side and awareness of the left side, ordinary awareness and awareness of the other self, the dreamer and the dreamed. The tonal, in giving order to the chaos inherent in the nawal, protects our being from the devastating impact that would result were we to confront the nawal unprepared. This distinction between tonal and nawal colors all of Don Juan's didactics, which are divided into teachings for the right side and teachings for the left side. The first served to create more healthy and functional elements on the island of the tonal, or what is known as sweeping the island of the tonal. The second have the purpose of bringing the apprentice to directly witness the nawal in such a way as not to lose sanity. So, if the tonal of each individual is what gives order and meaning to the world, and the reality thus perceived has no transcendental existence, then how is it that human beings share a similar view of reality among themselves? What is it that causes the tonal of every one of us to construct a reality we all share? Part of the answer can be found in what was said about the collective construction of ordinary perception using the first ring of power. However, there exists another factor known as the tonal of the times, which can be understood as a general description of the world that the members of each society share in their specific time and place. This they sustain between themselves by having internalized it simultaneously and by transmitting it to the newly born within the society. The latter must assimilate it to integrate themselves as members, which they become the moment they are capable of reproducing and sharing said description. It is precisely the tonal of the times that imposes on each individual a description that, combined with the personal tonal, constructs a perception to agree with the rest of the members of the society. Naturally, there exist small differences from person to person that have their origin in the individual personal history of each one. The awareness of the other self. On the left side, or nawal, of each person is what is known as the awareness of the other self. Its rescue and reintegration into the reality of a person constitute one of the most commonly recurring themes in the work of Castaneda. In fact, the integration of the awareness of the other self with everyday awareness brings nearer the possibility of integrating the totality of oneself. While it is true that the awareness of the other self as an expression of the nawal is incomprehensible and its possibilities are practically unlimited, it is also true that throughout his work are presented many examples of its operation. Below are some of the aspects that lie hidden in the other self, aspects that can be experienced with the help of corresponding techniques as detailed in subsequent chapters. The vague memories of the other self include remembrances of our own past stored in the memory of the left side, other self, that are substantially distinct from those of ordinary memory. This refers to memories that were not in agreement with the description of the world, so they were not registered by ordinary memory, thus remaining hidden in the awareness of the other self. The memories of our nature as luminous beings, which allow the perception of the human body as a field of energy. The awareness of our dreaming body, which allows the pragmatic utilization of our experience within the realm of dreaming. The awareness of death, which is what gives the warrior the impulse and detachment necessary to respond in the most effective manner in any situation. The possibility to align ourselves with the awareness of other forms of life, organic or not, such as trees, animals, or the earth itself. It should be added here that in the work of Castaneda, the term nawal is also used to designate the leader of a party of warriors. This is the being who, thanks to an extraordinary level of energy, can generate the appropriate conditions necessary, thus allowing the warriors of the group to move their assemblage points and experience for themselves the separate reality located beyond the narrow confines of the tonal. Chapter 2. The Seal of Impeccability. The myth of the warrior. The warrior does not exist, but is a myth, a beautiful myth of our time that, like all other myths, works to reflect our most noble aspirations as mortals. It serves as an invitation and a guide for the rare process of transforming ourselves into magic beings through their incarnation. All peoples of the earth in all epochs have had myths that reflect their moral level and their inclinations. Myths are in fact a reflection of a society and the men and women who make it up. Myths are, in part, stories told many times and transmitted from generation to generation. Anthropologically speaking, it would be absurd to question whether these tales are real or fictional. Myths are real insofar as they serve a real function among the people of a society. In its myths, a nation finds a mirror that reflects its best face, and even its unknown face, the face of the other. That other that I am, and nevertheless am not. That other that I am not, yet dream to be. The other who is a reflection of myself, yet different, elevated, transfigured, converted into a being with power, magic, and above all, freedom. The myth is the perennial hope of humans who, in spite of their faults, go on dreaming of the possibility of a life free of contradictions, free of oppression and violence, and the maelstrom that make up a good part of life in society. The myth is to society what dreams are to the individual. Therefore, the myth represents the dream of human beings, which whispers in their ear the promise of beauty and liberty. From the myth of Christ, a man who through a life of purification and service was transfigured and converted into a god, to the myths of Hercules, Quetzalcoatl, Huiraocha, Buddha, and many others, the theme is always the same, that of persons with profound aspirations living in a world of very low-level ambitions, of the conflict between the society in which they live and the aspirations of their spirit, of the struggle with the doubts and the tests through which they must pass to finally achieve their dream, to transcend the chaos and miserable aspects of the human condition. At the same time, myths also serve as a guide for action, a map by which we may arrive at the magical realities they describe. Far from being a form of entertainment, myths serve to promote methods of conduct and concrete action that permit us to leave behind the chaos in which we are accustomed to living. When we do not prove ourselves equal to our myths and are consequently not capable of acting on them, we convert them into dogma and found a religion. When this happens, the myth loses its role as liberator and becomes rather an instrument of oppression. I would say that it ceases to be a myth. A myth is something to be lived. Dogma is something to be believed. The first invites action. The second invites submission. The churches and their ministers serve as unnecessary intermediaries who generally obstruct our path when they don't liquidate it altogether toward liberty and knowledge. Among so-called primitive peoples, myth and ritual are intimately linked. The rite or ceremony represents the time outside of time. It is the space in which its participants will be transformed, incarnating the magic beings about which their songs and legends speak. This is the magic time in which the beings of power, light, love, and knowledge return to Earth to take on human form. The time in which humans convert themselves into magic beings they dream to be. I have lived that magic with the Huicholes. I have seen their ceremonial from the inside, since its meaning cannot be grasped from the outside. How the Maracame, the shaman, is transformed into deer maize peyote. How Tatewari, the grandfather fire, sings through his mouth, and how humans are converted into little suns. It is not, as some believe, the mere fact of eating peyote that gives the Huicholes the power to incarnate their myths in the ceremonial. Anyone can ingest peyote or any other hallucinogenic plant, but it takes the trained, disciplined life of the Huicholes and a lifetime of training to make use of what they obtain upon having a true vision that reflects better ways of living. In like manner, the way of the warrior, in which the warrior represents a magic being living in the midst of everyday society, is a myth of our time. Not because warriors or men and women of knowledge do not have a concrete existence, for indeed they do. Rather, this myth serves the same function as all others, to reflect our most worthy and dignified aspirations as mortals, inviting us to turn them into reality. Don Juan told Carlos that he could never become a man of knowledge. Similarly, we never become warriors, at least not permanently. Although we are always struggling toward that end, always on the path, like Gennaro, searching for Ixtlan. For ourselves, the myth of the warrior is a marvelous invitation for its incarnation to become real within us. The attitude of a warrior begins by bringing a little of that magic, time, into our everyday lives. In place of acting like machines, pre-programmed from outside, we choose to act purposely in the manner of a warrior. These moments of enlightenment in which we direct our lives from inside are like the magic time of a ceremony in which life speaks to us personally and we understand it, in which life becomes a friend, in which we comprehend what power and knowledge mean, not through imagination, but through concrete events. The challenge for those who follow the way of the warrior is to work hard so that these magic moments in which the myth is incarnated become more frequent and continuous, until the magic predominates over submission and harmony over chaos, until the dream of power and freedom predominates over the chaotic reality of everyday people, until the dream becomes reality. The way of the warrior, the only aid on the voyage into the unknown. Don Juan said in Castaneda's first book that a man goes to knowledge the same way he goes to war, with fear, respect, wakefulness, and with absolute confidence. Therefore, those who go to knowledge could very well be called warriors. The correct way to walk this path is in the manner of a warrior. In Tales of Power, the Yaqui sorcerer reveals that to live like a warrior is the glue that glues together all the parts of individual knowledge. The spirit of a warrior is one of the central themes found throughout the work of Castaneda, and it constitutes the fundamental attitude required for the demands made by the path of knowledge. Don Juan tells Carlos that only as a warrior can a person survive in the sorcerer's world. Although it is not necessary to be a sorcerer in order to be a warrior. The possibility is not easy, but it is open to anyone. The way of the warrior of which Castaneda speaks has little or nothing to do with human wars, such as we know them. Principally because it has nothing to do with violence or the intent to destroy anything or anyone. Far from it, in fact. This is perhaps difficult to understand in a culture such as ours, where the word war signifies one of the most frequent activities of civilized societies. Whether it be on an individual or social level, and where it always refers to the intent to impose our will on others through subtle or outright violence. However, the non-industrialized world has known types of wars and conflicts far removed from war as we know it. An example of this would be the flowery wars practiced in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica that, due to their non-violent nature, have never been correctly understood by Western historians. In fact, they have been regarded as merely another expression of war of the type with which we are so familiar. The Don Juanist point of view of the warrior and the struggle to be free is another example of a different type of war. The warrior is so called because he or she is always struggling against personal weaknesses and limitations, against the forces that oppose the increase in knowledge and power, against the forces that are driving us to our destiny as ordinary men and women. Forces determined entirely by personal history and circumstances. The warrior wants to rescue the possibility to choose how to be and how to live. It is a struggle for harmony and tranquility. It is a struggle for freedom, knowing that the struggle begins inside, projecting itself from there toward everything that makes up the world of actions. It, a quiet, gentle, and joyful fight. The way of the warrior is a form of constantly living the challenge of being. It eludes an exact or all-encompassing definition. The attitude of a warrior is a notion, a direction, a persistence in choosing the strongest and most authentic way in each action. Perhaps the most telling characteristic of a warrior is the perennial search for impeccability in every action even the smallest. The warrior understands impeccability as giving the best in everything he or she does, which implies making optimum use of individual energy. Even when all other motivations crumble, the warrior will persist in acting impeccably, if just for the sake of impeccability alone. Starting from this open concept, there arises an entire series of directives applicable to almost the entire range of human actions. Leading the sober life of the warrior gives a person the equilibrium and fortitude necessary to deal with difficult moments on the path of knowledge, regardless of the confusion suffered by reason or the injury caused to ego. Anything that we do can be done in the manner of a warrior. A warrior is always in an unyielding state of total war, leaving no room for negligence or surrender. This transforms our smallest acts into a challenge of power to carry us beyond our limits each time, to be better, more powerful, more gentle, more real. Among the fundamental elements available to a warrior, we can single out the will as a power that emanates from the self in order to touch and feel the world, even to direct it. A power that will have to be used in even larger and more intense battles that we would not dare to confront using our reason. And now, warriors are no longer persons chained to the fears and fantasies of their thought. Rather, they pay attention to their feelings, moved by their personal power, that substantial energy that they have through tremendous struggle, taken so long to increase and store. Warriors also count on the awareness of their own impending death, performing each act as though it were the last battle, and therefore the best. With death as a constant companion who infuses each act with power, they transform into magic their time as living persons on this earth. The awareness of inevitable death endows them with a disinterest to be free from attachments, while at the same time not indulging in denial. Detached from everything, conscious of life's brevity, and in constant struggle, warriors begin to arrange life through the power of their decisions. They work each moment to achieve control over themselves, thereby gaining control over their personal world. Warriors take the direction of life in their own hands and direct it strategically. Every little thing is an aspect of their strategy. In fact, control and strategy are two factors always present in their way of moving through life. Control is the constant effort to intentionally and purposefully direct the different elements that fall into warriors' forms of being and living. They apply it to all that they do because their actions are not the result of chance, external circumstances, or emotional outbursts, but rather part of the strategy of a warrior's life. In it, there is no place for whim or mechanical or impulsive actions, since warriors' actions are neither unconnected nor dispersed. Rather, the actions adapt themselves, always according to a previously planned strategy that warriors use to achieve the objectives that they have proposed as an expression of their most intimate predilection. The elements that make up the strategy of warriors are the elements of the way with a heart, which allows them to derive enjoyment from each moment of time. Making use of will, control, strategy, and the awareness of impending death, warriors learn to reduce their needs to nothing. They realize that needs engender wants and misfortune. Hence, being free from need, there are no anxieties or worries. Warriors can act without the weight of need, anxiety, or unhappiness. When they cease to need, there is no compulsion, so they can involve themselves to any extent required. Free from need, all that they have and receive, even the smallest, simplest items, become marvelous gifts. And life, regardless of how much is left to them, remains in a permanent state of abundance.